The tip he left covered the daycare bill to the exact cent. Then he walked out without a word. Jasmine Brooks is 28. A black single mother. A barista who unlocks the cafe alone at 5:40 in the morning because the sitter canceled and there was no one else. So her 4-year-old Mia sleeps in the stroller behind the counter while Jasmine counts tips that never stretch far enough. At 6, a silent Korean man stops in front of that stroller. His collar slips. A black koi tattoo curls up the side of his neck. Old scars mark his hands. He says almost nothing. He is Seo Tae-hyun. They call him the Quiet One. Later that day, a hotel ballroom, a class reunion. Diane blocks Jasmine from the VIP table with a rehearsed smile. Her ex, Ethan, waits with a microphone and a cruel grin. A barista badge in a room of platinum watches. A single mother among people who left her behind. And across the room, standing against a marble column, the quiet client from that morning watches every move she makes. He never took his eyes off her. Nobody in that room understood why yet. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The key turned twice before the lock gave. Jasmine leaned her shoulder into the glass door of the cafe and pushed, one arm hooked under the stroller handle, the other balancing a canvas bag that had already started to tear at the seam. 5:40 in the morning, the street behind her was still black and wet from the night, and the only light on the whole block came from the sign she was about to switch on. She got the stroller over the threshold first. Mia didn't stir. 4 years old and she could sleep through anything, through the rattle of the wheels, through the beep of the alarm panel, through her mother's breath coming short in the cold. Jasmine punched the code into the keypad. Wrong. She punched it again. The green light blinked and the beeping stopped. She exhaled. The cafe smelled of yesterday's coffee and floor cleaner. She moved through it in the dark by memory, past the 4 small tables, past the pastry case, behind the counter. Her hand found the bank of switches. She flipped them one at a time, the way she always did, so the hum came up slow instead of all at once. The lights caught the stroller, Mia's face, round and soft, one cheek pressed against the little pillow, the gold star clip holding back a curl that had come loose. Jasmine stopped for a second and just looked at her. Then she got to work. There was a lot to do before 6. Grind the beans, prime the machine, pull the chairs down off the tables, wipe the counter, load the register, set out the pastries the delivery man had left in the crate by the back door. She did it fast and quiet. She had done it 300 mornings and her body knew the order of it without her mind. She was tying the strings of her apron behind her back when she saw the envelope. It was propped against the register where she'd left it the night before, so she wouldn't forget. She had not forgotten. She had thought about it every hour since. She wiped her hands on the apron and picked it up. The daycare's name was printed in the corner. Little Sprouts Learning Center. Inside was a single sheet, and she didn't need to read it again because she knew the number by heart now. $412. Past due. A second notice, which meant a first notice had already come and gone. At the bottom, in a different ink, someone had written by hand, payment required by Friday to hold enrollment. Today was Wednesday. Jasmine folded the sheet along its old crease and slid it back into the envelope. She set it under the register drawer, out of sight, the way you put a thing away when looking at it doesn't help. The tip jar sat by the pastry case. She lifted it, tilted it toward the light and did the math without meaning to. Ones, mostly, a few fives folded small, coins at the bottom that didn't count for much. 2 nights of tips and a Sunday, maybe $90. She set the jar back down exactly where it had been. The first customer came at 6 on the dot. He was a regular, a man in a delivery uniform who ordered the same thing every day and left before he finished it. "Morning," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Morning." She already had the cup moving. "The usual?" "The usual." She made it and took his card and handed it back, and he was gone in under 2 minutes. The bell over the door swung and went still. For the next hour, the cafe filled the way it always did, in waves that matched the buses. Jasmine ran the counter alone. The owner didn't come in until 9, and the second barista was in class until noon, so from 6 to 9, the whole place was hers, to hold up by herself. She liked it, mostly. The rhythm of it kept her mind from wandering to the envelope. At 7, she checked on Mia. still sleeping. She had tucked the stroller into the corner behind the counter, half hidden by the stack of paper cups, where no one would trip on it and no health inspector would happen to look. It wasn't allowed. She knew it wasn't allowed. She had never done it before, not once in 3 years. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She wiped foam off her fingers and looked at the screen. Camille. The name made something tighten under her ribs before she'd even read the words. Camille was the sitter. Camille was 19, reliable, cheap, and the only reason Jasmine could work the shifts she worked. Camille had been booked for today 3 weeks ago, circled on the calendar on the fridge, because today was not an ordinary day. The message was 2 lines. So sorry, Jas, woke up with a fever and can't stop throwing up. I can't be around Mia like this. I feel terrible. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Jasmine read it twice. She set the phone face down on the counter. A customer was waiting, a woman with a laptop bag, and Jasmine took her order and made her latte and said have a good one, and the whole time her mind was moving fast and cold underneath. Today was the reunion. Not a reunion exactly, a luncheon. A 5-year gathering for the marketing cohort she'd graduated with. The one she'd left behind when everything fell apart. When the pregnancy and the breakup and the money all landed in the same 6 months and knocked her flat. Diane had organized it. Diane had sent the invitation on thick cream paper, and at the bottom, Diane had written, in a looping hand, "We'd all love to see how far you've come." Jasmine had almost thrown it away. Then she'd propped it on the fridge next to Camille's circled date and looked at it for 2 weeks. She was going. She had decided she was going. She had a dress for it, the dusty blue one, still in its garment bag because she never had anywhere to wear it. She had told herself she would walk in there with her chin up and let them see that she was fine, that she had built a life, that the version of her they remembered, the one Ethan had left, pregnant and broke and humiliated, was not the whole story. Ethan. The name came up on its own, the way it always did, and she pressed it back down. She had gotten good at that. 5 years of practice. She could go whole days now without the sound of him surfacing, the way he'd said it at the door of the apartment they'd shared, one bag already packed, his voice light like he was declining a second cup of coffee. This isn't what I signed up for, Jazz. She had been 11 weeks along. She hadn't even told the cohort yet. He had told them first, his version, and by the time she understood what had happened, the story was already set. She was the girl who'd trapped him and lost him anyway. She wiped the steam wand, though it was already clean. She had not gone to a single thing since. No birthdays, no graduations, no drinks. She had disappeared, and disappearing had felt like the only dignity left to her. But 5 years was a long time to be gone, and somewhere in the middle of it the shame had cooled into something harder, something she could stand on. She needed the sitter for that. She could not walk into a hotel ballroom full of people from her old life with a 4-year-old on her hip. She picked the phone back up and called. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Camille's voice, chirpy and recorded. Jasmine hung up before the beep. She stood behind the counter with the phone in her hand and the machine hissing and a line forming at the register, and she made herself breathe. There was no one else. Her mother was 3 states away. She had no partner. The other mothers she knew from the daycare were strangers, really, faces she nodded to at pickup. You did not call a stranger and ask them to take your child for an afternoon. And even if she could, the daycare wouldn't take Mia today, not with the account frozen, not with $412 sitting past due under the register drawer. The math closed around her like a hand. Go to the luncheon and bring Mia, or don't go at all. She thought about not going. She thought about it hard. It would be easier. No one would blame her. No one would even know. But she had already told Diane yes, and some stubborn part of her, the part that had gotten up at 5:40 every morning for 3 years, the part that had learned the alarm code in the dark, did not want to be the woman who said she'd come and then didn't, not to Diane, not to Ethan if Ethan was there. She looked at the stroller in the corner. Mia would be fine. Mia would sleep, mostly, and eat the snacks Jasmine packed, and if she woke up she was a good girl, quiet, easy, in a room full of adults. Jasmine would sit at the back. She would stay an hour. She would let them see her, chin up, and then she would leave. She put the phone away and took the next order. The morning ground on. She refilled the pastry case. She restocked the cups. She ran a card that got declined, and pretended not to see the man's face while she waited for the second one to go through. Every so often she glanced at the corner and Mia was still there, still sleeping, one hand curled up by her chin. A regular named Frank asked her, like he asked most days, when she was going to quit and let him buy her a real breakfast. She smiled the way she smiled for tips and said when he learned to make a flat white. He laughed and put $2 in the jar. $2. She thanked him like it was 20, because you never let them see the arithmetic behind your eyes, the running tally of how far $2 did and did not go. That was the thing about being broke in a way that didn't show. She wore the dress size she'd worn in college. She kept her hair pressed and her shoes clean and her back straight, and people looked at her and saw a pretty girl behind a counter, not a woman doing sums in the dark at 5:40 in the morning. The gap between how she looked and how she lived was its own kind of exhaustion. She carried it the way she carried the bag with the torn seam, carefully, from underneath, so nothing spilled. She thought about the reunion room, Diane's pearls. The other women, married now, most of them, with rings and second cars and nannies, who did not text at 7 in the morning to say they were sick. She thought about walking in with a stroller and watching them do the math she spent every day hiding. For one long second she wanted to sit down on the floor behind the counter and not get up. She didn't. She wiped the wand again and took the next order. At 8:30 the owner texted that he'd be late. Could she cover till 10? She wrote back of course. She always wrote back of course. By 9 the wave had passed, and the cafe went quiet, in the way it did between the commute and the mid-morning crowd. Jasmine used the lull to wipe down the tables and reset the chairs and, when no one was looking, to crouch by the stroller and check that Mia's cardigan was buttoned and her socks hadn't slipped down. "Almost lunchtime, baby," she whispered. "You're going to be so good for Mama." Mia's eyes fluttered but didn't open. Jasmine stood back up. Her knees ached. She was 28 and her knees ached in the mornings now, from the standing, from the cold. She pressed her palm flat against the small of her back and stretched and caught her own reflection in the window, thin and upright in the apron, hair pulled back, the smart pressed line of her shoulders that no amount of tired could bend. She would change into the dress at 10:30. She would fix her face in the little bathroom in the back. She would put the good earrings on, the gold ones, the last nice thing she owned. She would push the stroller the 6 blocks to the hotel, and she would walk in. She turned back to the counter to start the next batch of beans. And that was when the bell over the door rang. She heard it before she saw him. A single soft note, the door swinging slow, and then a stillness that wasn't like the usual customers, who came in already talking, already reaching for their phones, already halfway to the counter. This one stopped just inside the door. Jasmine looked up. He was tall. That was the first thing. The way he took up the frame of the doorway, shoulders wide enough to nearly fill it. A black suit, cut close, no tie, the collar of a dark shirt open at the throat. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't looking at the menu board. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at the corner, at the stroller. Jasmine felt it before she understood it, the way you feel a change in the weather. She set down the scoop. "Morning," she said. "What can I get you?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved from the stroller to her, slow, and there was nothing rude in it, nothing hungry, only a kind of attention so complete it made the back of her neck prickle. Dark eyes, very dark and very still, the kind that took in a room and gave nothing back. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low and even, an accent under the word, soft, not local. "Black. Small? Medium? Large?" "Small." She turned to make it. She was glad to turn, to have something to do with her hands. Behind her she could hear nothing, no shuffle of feet, no rustle of a coat, and it unsettled her more than noise would have. Most people filled silence. This man let it sit. She poured the coffee and turned back and set it on the counter. $2.50. He stepped forward to pay. And as he leaned in, reaching into the inside of his jacket, the open collar of his shirt shifted, pulled to the side by the movement of his arm, and Jasmine saw it. On the left side of his neck, running down under the fabric, was a tattoo, a fish. Black ink, old and fine. The scales worked in a way she'd never seen. A carp curved as if it were swimming up out of his collar and down into the dark of his shirt. A koi. The tail vanished under the cloth. The eye of it seemed to catch the light. She looked at it a beat too long. His hand came up, unhurried, and drew the collar closed. Not sharp, not embarrassed, just done, the way you close a door that was never meant to be open. She lifted her eyes to his and found him already watching her. "Sorry," she said, before she could think why she was apologizing. He said nothing. He set a bill on the counter and slid it toward her with 2 fingers. She glanced down. It was not a 5. It was not a 10. It was 100, and beneath it, folded, more. She could see the edges. She looked back up, and the words were already forming, the practiced words. "I'll get your change, sir," but he had picked up the small coffee, and he was already turning away. "Sir," she said, "this is too much. Let me—" He stopped at the door. He didn't turn all the way around, just his head, a quarter, enough to show the clean line of his jaw and the edge of that dark, still eye. "It's not," he said. And he was gone. The bell rang once behind him, and the street swallowed him, and the cafe was quiet again, and Jasmine stood there with the money under her palm. She lifted her hand. 4 bills. She counted them without breathing. 100, 100, 100, and beneath them, folded once, smaller notes. She smoothed them flat on the counter with fingers that had gone strange and clumsy. $412. Not 400, not 500, not a round number a rich man throws down without thinking. 412, to the dollar, the tens and the twos counted out and folded under the hundreds like they'd been set aside for exactly this, like someone had known. The number on the daycare notice. The number under the register drawer. The number she had said out loud to no one. She stood very still. Her first thought was that she'd miscounted. She counted again. The same. Her second thought made no sense, so she pushed it away, because it made no sense, because there was no way, because she had never seen that man before in her life. She went to the window. The street was ordinary. A bus pulling out, a woman with an umbrella she didn't need, a man reading a paper against the wall of the bank. No black suit, no wide shoulders. He hadn't gotten into a car she could see. He was simply not there, the way he had not been there 10 minutes ago, before the bell rang. Behind her, in the corner, Mia made a small sound and rolled over in her sleep. Jasmine turned from the window. She looked at the money in her hand, then at the stroller, then at the envelope she knew was under the drawer. She pulled the drawer open. She took the envelope out. She unfolded the daycare notice and set it flat on the counter next to the bills, and she looked at the 2 numbers side by side, the printed one and the counted one, and they were the same number, and there was no explanation for it that she could hold in her head. Payment required by Friday to hold enrollment. She had $90 in the tip jar, and 3 days to find 300 more, and no sitter, and a luncheon in 2 hours, where the people who'd watched her fall would be waiting to see if she'd gotten back up. And now this. Her hand went to the counter to steady herself. She realized she was gripping the edge, knuckles paling under the brown of her skin, and she made herself let go 1 finger at a time. Who does that? Who counts out a stranger's exact debt and folds it under a coffee? She ran through the morning backward. Had she said the number out loud to anyone? She hadn't. She'd read the notice alone at closing last night, in the dark, the way you read a thing you don't want the world to see. She hadn't called the daycare in front of a customer. She hadn't complained to the owner. The number lived in her head and under the drawer and nowhere else. Unless he'd seen it. She looked at the register. The notice had been face down under the drawer since 6. There was no way to see it from the customer's side of the counter. No way. She should feel relieved. Part of her did. A wild flooding relief that closed her throat, because the number was right there. The whole number. The exact weight of the thing that had sat on her chest since the second notice came. It would clear the account. It would keep Mia's place. It would buy her the afternoon. But relief was not the only thing. Because money that lands on the exact number of your secret is not luck. Luck is a round figure, a stranger's careless generosity, a $100 bill thrown down by a man who doesn't count. This was counted. This was aimed. This had known the shape of her trouble before it walked through her door. She thought of the way he'd stood inside the entrance and looked at the stroller first, before he'd looked at her, before he'd said a word, like he already knew what was there. She folded the bills once and pressed them into the pocket of her apron, deep, where they wouldn't fall, and her hand stayed over the pocket a moment longer than it needed to. Then she made herself move. There were beans to grind and a case to fill, and an owner who'd be in at 10, and a dress hanging in a garment bag in the back, and a daughter asleep in the corner. There was a whole ordinary morning still to get through, and she had learned a long time ago that the way through a thing you couldn't understand was to keep your hands busy until you could. She grinded the beans, she filled the case, she checked on Mia, whose eyes were open now, dark and soft, blinking up at the lights. "Hey, baby girl," Jasmine said, and crouched down, and the money crackled in her apron when she bent. "You sleep good?" Mia reached up and put a warm hand against her mother's cheek and didn't say anything at all. Mia's stomach growled and she laughed at the sound of it, delighted, and the laugh cut through the strangeness in the room like a window opening. Jasmine laughed too, without deciding to. She dug in the canvas bag and found the little container of cut fruit and set it on the tray, and Mia went at the melon with both hands. "We're going somewhere fancy today," Jasmine told her. "You have to be Mama's big girl." "Fancy," Mia repeated around a piece of fruit, and nodded like she understood, which she didn't, which was its own small mercy. Jasmine watched her eat. Whatever the money was, whatever the man was, the fact underneath it did not change. The account would clear, and her daughter's place would hold, and for the first Friday in a month, the box marked past due would go quiet. She had spent 3 years learning to take help she could not repay without letting it curl her spine. She would take this too. She would just not pretend she understood it. Jasmine held the small hand there. Over her daughter's shoulder, through the glass of the door, the street went on being ordinary. Buses and umbrellas and a man with a newspaper, and somewhere out in it was a stranger in a black suit with a fish inked on his neck who had walked in, and looked at her child, and paid a debt she had spoken to no one. She didn't know his name. She didn't know how he knew. She only knew that in 2 hours she had to be across town in a room full of people who thought they already knew everything about her, and that something had just changed that none of them could see. She stood up. She untied her apron, and then tied it again, and glanced at the clock. 10 to 10. Time to get ready. The valet took one look at the stroller and hesitated, hand half lifted, unsure whether to open the glass doors for a woman pushing a sleeping child into a 5-star lobby. Jasmine walked past him before he decided. The doors slid open on their own, marble underfoot, gold in the ceiling, a chandelier the size of her car dropping light onto everything, and somewhere ahead the low hum of 200 people who used to know her name. She kept the stroller straight. Mia slept with one fist against her cheek, the star clip catching the light, the butter-yellow dress rumpled from the drive. The dusty blue dress fit the way it had 5 years ago. The beige coat hung open. She had steamed both in the cafe bathroom over a kettle and prayed the wrinkles would fall. A fountain ran along one wall of the lobby, water sheeting down black stone into a lit basin. A concierge desk of dark wood curved beneath a wall of brass room keys nobody used anymore. Everything here was built to make a person feel either chosen or dismissed, and the building had already decided which one she was. Jasmine adjusted the coat over her arm and pushed forward. A group by the elevators turned to look. She felt the look land and slide off her, felt it catch on the stroller and hold there. A woman she half recognized whispered to the man beside her. The man smiled without warmth. Jasmine lifted her chin and kept the stroller wheels straight on the marble seam that ran toward the ballroom doors. A woman in emerald crossed the lobby toward her, heels clicking, smile already arranged. Diane. She had the clipboard against her hip and a lanyard of name tags fanned in one hand. Jasmine. Diane said it like a question she already knew the answer to. Her eyes went down to the stroller and stayed there a beat too long. You made it. I did. And you brought? Diane's smile tightened at the corners. How sweet. Her name's Mia. Of course. Diane looked back at her clipboard. She ran a manicured finger down the column and stopped. So, the main tables are seated already. We did assigned seating this year. Keeps the flow. She lifted a name tag, then set it back down without handing it over. You weren't on the confirmed list, so I don't actually have a place for you at the front. I RSVP'd. You RSVP'd late. Diane's voice stayed warm, and that was the cruelty of it. There's a lovely spot near the back, by the service doors, more room for the... She gestured at the stroller with 2 fingers, the way you'd point at spilled coffee. For all of that. Jasmine held the handle. She felt the plastic warm under her palms. The back is fine. Diane's eyes flicked once more to the stroller, then to the dusty blue dress, cataloging it, pricing it, filing the verdict away behind the smile. "You steamed that yourself, didn't you?" she said, light as air. "I can always tell." She let the little blade sit a second. "It's a good effort." "It's my dress," Jasmine said. "It fits." "It does." Diane's smile didn't move. "Wonderful." She was already turning. "Grab whatever seat's open. We'll do speeches at 1. She clicked away across the marble, emerald catching light, pearls at her throat, and did not look back to see whether Jasmine followed. The ballroom opened to the left through 2 doors held by staff in white gloves, round tables in gold cloth, centerpieces of white orchids, a raised platform at the front with a podium and a microphone, and around it the tables that mattered, the ones with the people who'd gotten the promotions, the marriages, the corner offices. Jasmine steered the stroller along the wall toward the back, past the smell of seared beef and warming bread, past waiters threading between chairs with silver trays. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne and did not stop at her end of the room. The service doors behind her swung open and shut with the traffic of the kitchen, a breath of heat and clatter each time, then gold-lit hush again. This was the seat you gave someone you wanted to keep at the edge of the picture. Diane had chosen it on purpose and dressed the choice up as a favor. Jasmine had spent 3 years reading the difference between a kindness and a maneuver, and she read this one clean. She found a table near the service doors. 2 empty seats, a half-finished bread basket, 3 strangers who nodded and went back to their conversation. She parked the stroller where she could keep one hand on it and sat. Across the room, laughter rose and fell. She recognized the shapes of people before their faces. Marcus, who'd once borrowed $40 and never paid it back, now in a watch that cost more than her rent. Priya, married, glowing. The old crowd, 5 years thicker and softer and richer, holding wine they hadn't checked the price of. She kept her hand on the stroller. Mia's chest rose and fell. A waiter set water in front of her without asking. She drank half of it. The bread in the basket had gone cold. She wouldn't eat. She'd sit her hour, keep the promise she'd made in the cafe mirror that morning, and leave before Mia woke hungry and turned the whole thing into a scene. That was when she felt it, the weight of being looked at, not the glance and away of the strangers at her table. Something steady. She turned her head slow, the way you do when you don't want to be caught turning, and scanned the far wall. He stood by a marble column near the entrance to the salon, a glass of water in one hand, untouched. Black suit, no tie, 2 buttons open at the collar. The same man who had slid $412 across her counter that morning and told her, "It's not too much." Jasmine's grip tightened on the stroller handle. He was not seated. He was not eating. He held the water and he watched the room, and the part of the room he watched was the corner where she sat with her daughter. When a waiter passed between them, he waited, patient, and when the waiter cleared, his eyes were still there. A woman she'd once shared a cubicle with drifted over, wine in hand, and crouched beside the stroller with an "Oh my goodness" on her lips. Priya. She'd been kind, once, in the small ways that survive. "Jasmine, she's gorgeous," Priya whispered. "How old?" 4. 4. Priya's eyes went soft, then careful, the way people got careful when they remembered how Jasmine had left. "We wondered where you went. You just disappeared." "I had a reason to." Jasmine looked down at Mia. "Best reason there is." Priya squeezed her wrist. "You look good, girl. Whatever anybody in here says." She glanced toward the front tables, toward Ethan's blonde crown of hair, and her mouth tightened. Then she stood and drifted back to her seat, because that was how far kindness reached in a room like this. A whisper, a squeeze, and a retreat before anyone important noticed. Jasmine looked back at the column. He was still there, still watching. He lifted his wrist to check the time, and the light caught it. A band of platinum, pale and heavy, the kind of watch that didn't tell time so much as declare it. Jasmine's own hand went, without thinking, to the pocket of the coat where her name badge still sat, the plastic one from the cafe, with her first name printed crooked and a coffee ring stamped into the corner. She'd forgotten to leave it in the car. 2 objects in one room. His wrist and her pocket. The whole distance between them measured in a glance. She looked away first. Her heart moved wrong in her chest. She told herself it was a coincidence. Rich men owned buildings. Rich men stood in the buildings they owned. A hotel like this, a reunion like this, Of course, a man in a suit that expensive belonged here more than she did. She reached for the water again and found the glass empty. When she looked back the second time, he had moved. Not toward her. Along the wall, to a new column, one with a cleaner sightline to her table. He set his glass on a passing tray and took a fresh one and did not drink from that one either. Jasmine put both hands in her lap and pressed them flat against the dusty blue to stop them shaking. A man dropped into the empty chair beside her. She smelled the cologne before she saw the face. Sharp, expensive, familiar in a way that turned her stomach. Jazz. Ethan smiled the way he'd always smiled, like he was letting you in on a joke where you were the punchline. No way, they let you in. 5 years. His jaw was the same, the gray-blue eyes were the same. He had a wedding band on now, thin and gold, and he wore it like a trophy from a game she hadn't been invited to play. Ethan, she kept her voice level. He leaned back, arm over the chair, and let his eyes travel over her, then down to the stroller, and something flickered across his face. Calculation, maybe, or the fast math of a man realizing what a sleeping 4-year-old meant. That yours? He nodded at Mia. Mine. Huh. He let it sit. He picked a piece of bread from the basket, tore it, didn't eat it. You look good. Surprised, honestly. Heard you were slinging coffee somewhere out in the flats. I own the shift, she said. I opened the place. Sure you do. He popped the bread in his mouth and chewed and looked at her the whole time. Still, long way from the plans you used to talk about, huh? Marketing director by 30, remember that? She remembered. She remembered saying it to him in a bed they'd shared, back when she thought he was listening. Things change, she said. They do. He glanced at the front tables, at the podium, then back. I'm running the whole West region now. 200 people under me. Bought a place up on the ridge. He turned the wedding band with his thumb. Funny how it works out. Some people rise. By the column, the man in black had gone still. Jasmine felt it more than saw it, the stillness of something that had picked up a scent. 200 people under you, she said, and you came all the way to the back of the room to tell me about it. That landed. His jaw ticked. For half a second, the easy host cracked, and something meaner showed through, the thing she'd seen the night he'd told her, "This isn't what I signed up for," and picked up his keys. I'm glad for you, she said, and meant none of it, and let him hear that she meant none of it. Ethan's smile thinned. He didn't like that. He never had liked it when she refused to be small in front of him. Speeches soon, he said, standing, buttoning his blazer. You should stick around, Jazz. Might be a few laughs. He tapped the table twice with 2 knuckles. Good to see the barista life's treating you gentle. He walked back toward the front, toward the good tables, and a woman there, blonde, in a dress that fit like it was sewn on her that morning, put a hand on his arm and laughed at something before he even sat. The wedding band caught the light as he pulled out her chair. So that was the wife. That was the life he'd traded her for. 5 years in a ridgetop house and a woman who laughed on time. Jasmine found she felt nothing for him. Not longing, not even the old hurt. Only a flat, clean tiredness. And under it, the thing she couldn't shake. That a stranger by a column had watched the whole exchange and gone still as stone. Jasmine breathed. She looked down at Mia. Still sleeping, she reached and tucked the thin cardigan a little higher on the small shoulder and let her hand rest there until it stopped shaking. When she raised her eyes, the man by the column was looking at Ethan's back. His face gave nothing, but the glass of water in his hand had been set down on the ledge beside him, and both his hands were free now, and one of them, the one marked with old ink and older scars, had curled loose at his side and then opened again. A woman at the podium tapped the microphone. Feedback whined through the room. Diane, emerald and pearls, smiling her arranged smile. If everyone could find their seats, Diane said, we'll get started. 5 years. Can you believe it? The room settled. Waiters stepped back to the walls. Jasmine kept her hand on the stroller and looked at the exit and did the math. How long the speeches would run, how fast she could get out if Mia woke, whether she could last the hour she'd promised herself. Diane ran through a list. The class had done well. Weddings, babies, 1 book deal, 3 startups. Names read out to applause. Jasmine clapped when the room clapped and watched the door. She let herself picture the escape. Down the service hall behind her, the kitchen, a loading door to the street, The drive home with the windows down and Mia waking somewhere on the freeway, asking for a song. 1 hour. She'd promised herself 1 hour and dignity on the way out. She checked the little clock on the wall above the doors. 15 minutes in, 45 to go. Across the room, the man in black shifted to keep the sightline as a waiter wheeled a cart between them. He never let the cart win. He found the gap and settled into it and went still again, and the water in his hand stayed full. And now, Diane said, a few words from someone who's had quite the 5 years. You all know him. West Region, top of the board. Ethan. The applause came ready-made. Of course they'd planned this. Of course the man who'd left her had been given the microphone at the party she'd been seated in the back of. Jasmine's stomach dropped an inch. She looked at the exit again, and did the math again, and knew, with a sinking certainty, that walking out during his speech would only hand him a better ending. Then Ethan stood, unprompted, and crossed to the podium, and Diane stepped aside with a laugh and handed him the microphone like they'd rehearsed it. I gotta say something, Ethan said, and the room quieted for him the way rooms always had. Because this, all of us, back together, this is special. He scanned the tables, warm, easy, the golden host. We set out with big dreams, right? And it's beautiful to see how far we've come. A pause, the smile, most of us. A ripple of laughter, the kind that doesn't know yet where it's going. I mean, look around. Ethan's eyes moved, slow, deliberate, and found the back of the room. Found her. Some of us are running regions, buying homes. And some of us, he let it hang, and the whole room turned to follow his gaze, 200 heads swiveling toward the service doors, toward the woman in the dusty blue dress with a stroller pressed to her side. Some of us are still pouring the coffee. The laughter came louder now. It found its target, and it liked it. Jasmine did not move. No, it's sweet, Ethan went on, riding it, holding the mic close. Single mom, doing the whole thing solo. Honestly, that's brave. Showing up here, kid and all. He shook his head, chuckling into the microphone, and the sound of it filled the gold room. Takes guts to come to a room full of people who made it when you. Diane, beside him, laughed and touched his arm and leaned into the mic. Be nice, Ethan. But she was smiling, and everyone could see she didn't mean it, and that made it worse. Someone at a front table clapped. A whoop. The laughter rolled toward the back of the room like water finding a drain, and at the bottom of it sat Jasmine with her hand on her sleeping child. Her face burned. She felt it climb her neck. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward and refused to give them the wet eyes they were waiting for. 3 years of opening a cafe alone in the dark. 400 nights walking a fever down a hallway. A daycare bill she'd been ready to beg the woman at the front desk to split into thirds. None of that fit inside the word coffee. The way Ethan spat it into the microphone, and none of these people would ever know the weight of it, and that was the joke. They thought the small life was the easy one. Mia stirred, a small sound. The star clip shifted. Jasmine dropped her hand to the stroller and rocked it, slow, an inch each way, the motion she'd done 10,000 nights, and Mia settled back into sleep. Get up, she told herself. Get up and walk out with your head straight and don't run. She stood, the chair scraped. A few heads at nearby tables turned to watch the show's next act. She gathered the coat over her arm. She took the stroller handle in both hands. She would walk the length of the room along the wall, past all of them, past Ethan at his podium, and she would not hurry, and she would not cry, and they would remember that she left standing. She turned the stroller toward the doors, and she saw him. The man in black had not moved from the column. In all of it, the speech, the laughter, the whoop from the front table, he had not laughed, had not turned to his neighbor, had not so much as shifted his weight. He stood exactly where he had stood, and his eyes had never once gone to Ethan at the podium. His eyes were on her. They had been on her the whole time. Through the joke and the laughter and the burning of her own face, this stranger had watched only her, steady, unblinking, the way a man watches a thing he has already decided belongs to him. Jasmine stopped with her hands on the stroller. Because in that half second, standing in the worst minute of her adult life with 200 people laughing at her back, she understood something she could not yet explain. The morning, the exact money, the way he had looked at the stroller before he looked at her. This man in the black suit was not a guest at her reunion. He had not wandered in. He was here because she was here. The room laughed on around her, small and far away now, a sound underwater. Ethan said something else into the microphone and got his applause. Diane clapped. The blonde woman laughed on cue. And the still man by the column, ignored by a room full of people who thought they were the important ones, took one step off the marble base. His polished shoe met the floor without a sound. His head tilted, a fraction, toward the podium, toward Ethan, the first time he had acknowledged the man existed. Then his eyes came back to Jasmine and held. 100 small things fell into line at once. The way he'd looked at the stroller first, that morning, before he looked at her. The bill counted to the dollar. The note turned face down so no one across the counter could read it. It's not. He had known the number before she'd told a soul. He had known where she'd be at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. He had put himself against a marble column with a clean line to her table, and he had stayed there while a room full of strangers laughed, because the laughing was not his concern. She was. She did not know his name. She did not know what he was, or what the ink on his neck meant, or why a man like that would cross a city to pay a stranger's daycare bill and then stand for an hour in a gold room watching over a woman who had never asked to be watched. But she knew, the way you know a storm before the first drop, that the story unfolding in this room was not the one Ethan thought he was telling from the podium. It was not about the barista and the laughing crowd and the man with the region and the ridgetop house. It was about the quiet one against the wall, the one nobody in the room had bothered to look at, the one who had been the whole point from the first cup of black coffee at 6 that morning. Jasmine's hands stayed on the stroller. Mia slept. Ethan's voice rolled on through the speakers, pleased with itself, certain it had won. The man in black took another step, and another. Not fast, not slow. He came off the wall and into the room, and he moved along the same path she'd meant to take. The path toward the doors, toward her. A straight line through the gold tables that would bring him past the podium on the way. A waiter stepped aside for him without being asked. So did a man in a gray suit who'd been half standing to refill his wine. He saw who was coming and lowered himself back into his chair and found something interesting in his plate. The room did not know his name any more than she did, but the staff knew. The staff had known from the moment he walked in which guest owned the floor they were standing on, and now, one by one, they were peeling back from his path. At the podium, Ethan was still talking, still riding his applause, his back to the room's true center of gravity. He gestured with the microphone. He said her name once more, warm and cruel, and reached for another laugh. He would not get to finish the joke. Jasmine understood that now, watching the quiet man cross the gold room. Something was about to end, and it was not going to be her. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She could not have said, in that moment, whether the thing walking toward her through the laughing room was rescue or something worse. She only knew that every eye in the ballroom was pointed the wrong way, at the man with the microphone, and that the one person who mattered had just started to move, and no one had noticed but her. Her mouth had gone dry. Part of her wanted to turn the stroller and run for the kitchen door before whatever this was arrived. Part of her had stopped being able to move at all. The man crossed the last table's length, and the light from the chandelier ran down the black of his suit, and the low murmur of 200 people kept flowing the wrong direction, toward the podium, toward the wrong man. She held her ground by the service doors, one hand white-knuckled on the stroller, and watched him come. Ethan reached the podium's edge before the man in black had crossed half the room. He'd stepped down from the mic, still riding the laugh, the buttons of his blazer catching the light, and his eyes had found the back of the room again. Found her hand on the stroller, the coat over her arm, the small figure sliding toward the service doors. He liked an audience too much to let his best line walk out on its own legs. Jazz, he said it warm. He said it loud enough for the front tables. Where you running? Jasmine kept her hand on the stroller and her feet moving. 2 more steps to the doors. The brass handle waited under the exit light, and she measured the distance the way she measured a rush at the counter. In bodies, in seconds, in what could spill. Ethan came off the platform. He came fast for a man pretending to stroll. The room turned with him, 200 faces swiveling from the podium to the aisle, following the host of their own amusement toward the woman in the back. Come on, stay for the toast. He lifted his glass toward her without looking at it. We're all family here. She didn't answer. Answering was fuel, and she'd learned years ago that fuel was the only thing he ever really wanted from her. He crossed the last of the open floor and put himself between her and the doors. Not touching. Just there. Chest square, feet planted, that permanent smirk sitting on his mouth like it had been screwed in. Up close, his cologne was the same one from 5 years ago, and her stomach registered it before her mind did, a small, cold turn she hated herself for. "Little Sprouts, right?" he said, quieter now. "For her. That's the daycare on 9th. Marcus told me. $2.40 a week, that place." He let it hang. "You clearing that on tips?" The words landed exactly where he'd aimed them. She felt the envelope in the apron she wasn't wearing, felt the number, felt the thin margin of her whole life laid bare by a man who'd never once asked what his daughter's name was. 4 years he'd known nothing about the child sleeping 10 feet from him, and the first fact he chose to collect was the price of keeping her fed. That was the shape of him. It had always been the shape of him. She'd just been too young and too pregnant to read it the first time. "Move," she said. "I'm being nice." He spread his hands. "I'm asking you to stay. People came a long way. Priya flew in. And you show up with a—" His eyes dropped to the stroller, to the small shape under the white cardigan, "with a prop, and you want to slip out the back like the help." He shook his head, almost sorry. "That's rude, Jazz." To Diane. She planned all this. Behind him, Diane had drifted off the podium and stood at the head of the nearest table, clutch pressed to her stomach, watching with a smile that had gone thin at the corners. She didn't step in. She didn't step back either. She held her place the way a person holds a good seat. "You've had your laugh," Jasmine said. "Let me leave." "Or what?" The smirk widened. He was enjoying the audience behind him, the 200 quiet faces, the sense that the room was his, and she was in it. "You'll pour coffee on me?" Somebody near the front laughed. One person. It was worse than the whole room. Jasmine angled the stroller to go around him. He shifted with her. Easy. Blocking. A man who'd played enough sports to know how to keep a body in front of him without seeming to try. "Hey." His voice dropped the warmth. "I'm talking to you." His hand closed on her arm. It happened fast and it happened casual, the way he did everything. Fingers wrapping just above her elbow, through the coat, a grip that said stay without saying it, the grip of a man who had never once been told no by his own body. He didn't squeeze hard, he didn't have to. The wrongness of it was the whole point, his hand on her, in front of everyone, deciding where she stood. Jasmine went still. For 1 second the noise of the room dropped out. She felt the 4 points of his fingers. She felt the coat bunch under them. She felt something older than this afternoon rise up her spine. The memory of the last time a decision about her body had been made without her. 11 weeks in, a door closing, her name in his mouth like an inconvenience. "Let go," she said. Low, even. Her pulse hammered in the arm he held, and she kept her face smooth over it, because giving him the fear was giving him the win. She'd learned that too, in the years since. A man like Ethan fed on the tremor, the wet eye, the raised voice. Denied all three, he had to escalate to get his meal, and escalation in front of witnesses was the one thing his kind of charm couldn't survive. So she stayed quiet. She stayed still. She made him be the one to do more. "Sit down and I will." "Ethan," her voice didn't shake. That was the one thing she had, and she held it. "Take your hand off me." He didn't. He pulled instead, not violently, just a tug, a redirection, the motion of a man steering something that belongs to him back toward the table. And her hand, the one on the stroller, was yanked with her. The stroller jerked. The front wheels skipped off the marble. The frame tipped, caught, rocked back down on its axles with a hard clack that ran up through the handle and into her palm. The blanket slid. The little star clip flashed as Mia's head rolled against the padding. Mia woke. Not all at once. First the flutter, the small crease between the brows, the mouth working, the hands coming up out of the blanket in 2 starfish fists. Then the eyes, dark and unfocused, opening onto a ceiling of chandeliers and 200 strangers and a stranger's cologne. The face that had been sweet in sleep folded in on itself. She began to cry. It started thin and climbed. The particular sound of a 4-year-old torn out of deep sleep in a place with no soft edges, a rising note that cut through the ballroom's hush and bounced off the marble and filled it. Every person who'd been enjoying the show heard the child now, heard what the joke had woken. The sound did something to the room. Waiters stopped mid-pour. The clink of cutlery died at the front tables. 200 adults who'd been comfortable a moment ago sat in a silence that curdled as it held, because there is no crowd on earth, however cruel, that keeps laughing over a crying child. And the ones who'd laughed hardest were the ones who now found somewhere else to look. Jasmine dropped everything else. The coat hit the floor. Ethan's hand was still on her arm, and she stopped feeling it. Stopped feeling the room. Stopped feeling the 200 faces. She turned into the stroller and got both hands on it and steadied it and bent, and her voice changed completely. Went to the register she used at 2 in the morning, at 4 with a fever, the register that had no audience in it at all. I'm here, Mama's here. I've got you, baby. Mommy? Mia's arms reached up, blind, and her wail broke and doubled. Mommy, up. I know, come here. She unclipped the harness with fingers that knew the buckle in the dark and lifted her daughter out and up against her shoulder, all warm weight and damp curls and small fists grabbing fabric. Mia buried her face in Jasmine's neck and howled, and Jasmine turned her body so that the child faced the wall, faced away from the room, away from the man, and she felt the little heart going fast against her collarbone. You're okay. You're okay. It was just a bump. I've got you. Mia's fist found the collar of the dress and held it. Her breath came in wet, hitching pulls against her mother's throat, and each one hit Jasmine somewhere below thought, in the place that had gone without sleep for 4 years so this small person wouldn't have to. She rubbed slow circles on the little back. She hummed 3 notes of a song she sang at bath time. The room, the man, the 200 faces, all of it thinned to static behind the single task of a frightened child in her arms. At a front table, a woman stood up. Priya. She got halfway out of her chair with a hand to her mouth, and her husband caught her sleeve, and she stayed there suspended between sitting and coming, her face doing the thing that faces do when a joke stops being a joke. She didn't cross the floor, but she stood, and other people saw her stand, and something began to move through the room that had not been there during the laughter. And over her daughter's head, cheek pressed to those curls, Jasmine looked at Ethan. He'd let go when she turned. He stood there with his hand still half raised, and for one flicker something crossed his face. The thing a man feels when the room he was performing for goes quiet in the wrong way, when the laugh doesn't come, when a baby is crying and everyone can see whose hand had been where. It crossed his face and then he shoved it off, because Ethan Caldwell did not do wrong, and if the moment had gone strange it was hers, not his. See? This is, he said, pitching it back toward the room, recovering, spreading his hands. This is exactly what I mean. You bring a kid to a networking lunch, of course it's gonna. Don't. Jasmine's voice cut across his, quiet and flat, one hand cradling Mia's head. Don't you talk about her. The room heard that too. Somewhere a chair scraped. Someone whispered. The laughter that had owned the ballroom 2 minutes ago had drained out of it completely, and what filled the space now was the crying of a child and the sound of 200 people realizing, in a slow, cold wave, that they had been laughing at a single mother while a man shook her baby awake. Diane found her voice. Maybe we should. She took a half step, clutched, smile gone. Ethan, maybe she should just. Stay out of it, Diane, he said. And there it was. The mask slipped a full inch. The charming one, the region runner, the man with 200 people under him and a house on the ridge, for one syllable the thing underneath showed through. The flat irritation of a man who was not being obeyed, and Diane's mouth closed and she stepped back into her good seat and said nothing more. Jasmine bent and got her coat off the floor one-handed. Mia still clamped to her shoulder. She got the strap of the diaper bag up her arm. She reached for the stroller and started to fold it against her hip so she could push it one-handed and carry her daughter with the other, because there was no version of leaving this room that let her put Mia down. Not now, not near him. Her hands were full. Coat, bag, folding frame, 36 pounds of crying child. She was doing the thing mothers do, the impossible arithmetic of too many objects and 2 arms, and she was doing it in front of 200 people who had come to watch her fail. Ethan watched her struggle with the stroller. He had time to help and chose the other thing. He always chose the other thing. She watched him watch her. The coat, the bag, the jammed frame, the child. And saw him calculate the picture it made. saw the smirk climb back onto his mouth as the math came out in his favor. He wasn't cruel by accident. Cruelty was the instrument he played, and he'd had 5 years to practice the note that hurt her most. "You need a hand?" he said, and smiled. It was the cruelest thing he'd said all afternoon, precisely because it sounded like kindness. He said it knowing she'd rather drop everything than take his hand, said it so the room would see him offering and see her refusing. One last move to make her the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the woman who couldn't even accept help. Jasmine didn't look at him. "No," she said. She got the stroller half folded. It stuck. The catch that always stuck, the one she wrestled every morning at the cafe, jammed at the worst angle, and the frame hung there awkward and heavy off her hip while Mia's crying wound down into hitching sobs against her neck. Her arm shook, not from fear, from the weight. But a shaking arm looks the same from 30 feet, and she knew it, and she hated that she knew it. "Suit yourself," Ethan said, and turned back toward the room, toward his table, toward the wife who'd put her hand on his arm, the performance shifting into its recovery, the shrug, the what can you do, the reclaiming of the crowd. "Anyway, sorry about that, folks. Some things never change. Let's get back to—" He got 2 steps. Jasmine straightened. Mia's sobs had gone to shudders, the exhausted aftershocks of a child crying herself back toward calm, her face still hidden in her mother's neck, one fist knotted in the collar of the dusty blue dress. And Jasmine stood in the back of that ballroom with a stuck stroller on her hip and a coat sliding off her arm and her whole life on public display, and she did the only thing left to her. She lifted her chin. She stopped fighting the stroller. She left it half-folded, hanging, and she just held her daughter properly instead, both arms coming up around that small back, and she stood at her full height in the ruined quiet and looked at the doors. Not at Ethan, not at Diane, not at the 200 faces, at the brass handle and the exit light and the way out. She would walk. She would leave the stroller if she had to. She would carry her child through the whole length of that room past every table with her head up, and she would not run, and she would not cry, and she would not give a single person there the thing they'd come to see. "Okay, baby," she whispered into the curls. "We're going home. We're going home now." Mia's breathing had begun to slow, the fist in the collar loosened by a finger. Somewhere in the small body pressed to hers, the animal panic was draining back down toward sleep, and Jasmine felt it go and matched her own breath to it. In for 4, out for 4, the rhythm she'd taught herself in the dark of a hospital ward 4 years ago when there'd been no one else to teach her anything. She thought about the walk ahead, 40 feet of marble, every table, the Marcuses and the Prias and the ones whose names she'd let herself forget, the wife at the front with her hand on Ethan's arm, Diane at her good seat. She would have to carry her child past all of it without the stroller, without a free hand, without a single ally on the floor, and she made her peace with that the way she'd made her peace with the daycare bill and the canceled sitter and the coat she'd forgotten to grab, by deciding it was simply the next thing and doing it. She took 1 step toward the doors, and that was when she felt it, the shift in the room that had nothing to do with her, a change in the air pressure, a turning of heads that moved not toward her but past her, toward the aisle, toward something coming up the center of the floor with the unhurried certainty of weather. The whispers changed pitch. Near the front, a man in a good suit rose halfway out of his chair and then thought better of it and sat back down. A waiter with a tray stepped sideways into a pillar's shadow and stayed there. The hotel's own people, the ones in the pressed vests along the wall, went straight-backed and still, and their eyes tracked one point in the room the way a compass tracks north. Jasmine turned her head. The man in black was crossing the last of the floor. He came up the center aisle with his hands loose at his sides and his shoulders level and his eyes on one thing, and the one thing was not Ethan. He didn't look at the podium. He didn't look at the 200 faces turning to follow him. He walked through the middle of the ballroom the way a man walks through a room he owns, because he did own it, the floor and the walls and the brass and the chandeliers, all of it his, though not one guest in that room had known it until this second. And every step closed the distance between him and the corner where a woman stood holding a crying child. Ethan felt the room change behind him and turned to see what had stolen his crowd. He found a stranger. Tall, black suit, no tie, 2 buttons open at the collar, sleeves turned back off forearms that carried old ink and older scars, a face that gave away nothing, eyes that had already dismissed him, and along the left side of the man's neck, where the collar sat loose, a shape rose out of the fabric, dark, deliberate, the sweep of a koi in black traditional line, climbing toward his jaw. Ethan didn't know what he was looking at. He only knew the temperature of the room had dropped and that the attention he'd been feeding on all afternoon had transferred, whole and instant, to the man walking up his aisle. "Can I?" Ethan started, stepping into the aisle with a host's reflex, a hand coming up. "Sorry, this is a private." The man walked past him. Didn't slow, didn't look. Passed within a foot of Ethan Caldwell as if he were a coat rack, and Ethan's raised hand hung in the air, and his sentence died in his mouth, and something in his posture, the sports team ease, the region runner swagger, folded down a notch on its own, the animal part of him reading a thing the rest of him refused to. Jasmine watched the stranger come. Her arms tightened on Mia. Her heart was going the way her daughter's had a minute ago, fast and high, and every rational thing in her said this made no sense, that the silent customer from 6 that morning, the man who'd left $412 turned face down on her counter, was crossing a 5-star ballroom in front of 200 people to reach the exact corner where she stood at the lowest hour of her worst day. He stopped an arm's length from her. The whole ballroom had stopped with him. Nobody spoke. The waiter in the pillar's shadow held his tray flat and level like a man trying not to be seen. Along the wall, the hotel staff had arranged themselves into a stillness that was its own kind of answer. They knew exactly who this was, and their knowing had spread to the guests like cold through water, so that 200 people understood they were witnessing something without one of them being told what. Up close, he was taller than the memory of him at the counter. He looked at Mia first, the wet face turned into Jasmine's neck, the fist in the collar, the exhausted sobs, and something moved behind his eyes and was gone. Then he looked at Jasmine, at the coat sliding off her arm, at the stroller jammed half-folded on her hip, at her chin, still up. He reached out. Jasmine flinched. One small involuntary pull, the body's memory of the last hand that had reached for her, and then went still, because his hand didn't touch her. It closed on the stroller instead, on the frame, and with one motion, without effort, without looking, he unstuck the catch that jammed every single morning of her life, and folded the whole thing flat and took its weight off her hip and onto his own arm. Then he stepped to her side. Not in front, beside. He turned to face the room the way she was facing it, and he set himself half a pace nearer to Ethan than to her, so that his shoulder sat between the two of them, and he stood there holding a barista's stroller in a $2,000 suit and said nothing at all. The room stared. Ethan found some of his voice. "Do you?" He looked from the stranger to Jasmine and back, the pieces refusing to fit, his smirk trying to reassemble and failing. "Do you two know each other?" The man in black turned his head. He looked at Ethan for the first time since he'd entered the room. A slow, flat, complete look, the look a person gives an object to decide whether it's worth moving. And Jasmine, close enough now to see it, watched the last of the color leave her ex's face. Nobody had answered his question. Nobody moved. 200 people held a single breath, and the child's sobs had quieted to nothing against her mother's neck, and the exit light burned red over a door that no longer seemed like the only way out. Jasmine stood in the ruin of the worst afternoon of her life, her daughter in her arms and a stranger at her shoulder holding her folded stroller, and understood that she had reached the bottom of something, and that the bottom had not, as she'd braced for, been the end of the fall. It had been the floor, rising up to meet her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was. She only knew that the man who had paid her daughter's daycare without being asked had just crossed a room full of people who'd laughed at her, and put himself between her family and the man who'd shaken her child awake, and that he was waiting, patient, unhurried, terrible in his stillness, for Ethan Caldwell to make one more mistake. And Ethan, God help him, was still deciding whether to. "Look, buddy, I don't know who," Ethan tried, the swagger clawing back up, one hand lifting again toward the stranger's shoulder, toward the space between them, toward the woman he still, some animal part of him insisted, had the right to steer. His fingers came up. He couldn't help it. It was the deepest thing in him, deeper than sense, deeper than the cold reading his own body was trying to give him. The certainty that this woman was a thing he was permitted to touch, that the afternoon had gone wrong only because someone had briefly forgotten it, that one more grab would set the room back the way he liked it. They started toward Jasmine's arm one more time, the old reflex, the ownership he'd never questioned, reaching past the stranger to reclaim what the afternoon had somehow taken from him. And the room drew its breath and held it, and Jasmine turned her body to shield her daughter, and the man in black went very, very still. The hand never landed. It came for Jasmine, past the man in black, fingers spread, and then the man moved, and the room lost the ability to breathe. He did not reach far. He did not need to. His hand closed over Ethan's wrist mid-air, catching it the way you catch a falling glass, without hurry, without effort, and everything after that happened in a space smaller than a doorway. There was a sound, not loud, a single dry pop, the kind a green branch makes when you bend it too far, and it carried across 200 silent people because there was nothing else left to hear. Ethan's mouth opened. No sound came out of it. His knees dipped an inch, then locked, and the whole arrogant line of his shoulders folded inward around the arm that wasn't his to control anymore. His face went the color of the tablecloth. Jasmine felt the man's other arm come back and sweep the stroller behind him, out of the lane, and she stepped with it because his forearm found the small of her back and moved her the way a current moves a boat. Not a grab, a redirection. She was standing behind his shoulder now, Mia's face turned into her neck, and the space where she had been was empty. Ethan tried to pull his wrist free. The man let him try. That was the cruelest part, and Jasmine saw it and understood it in the same breath. The grip didn't tighten to stop him, it simply held, a fixed point Ethan strained against and could not budge, so that every ounce of his own strength turned back on the joint that had already given. Somewhere in the middle of the room, a fork slipped off a plate. It rang once against china and then rolled onto the carpet and stopped, and the tiny sound traveled the whole distance because nothing competed with it. A woman near the podium had a hand over her mouth. A waiter stood frozen with a tray of untouched champagne canting slowly in his hands, the flutes leaning, none of them falling. Jasmine's arm tightened around her daughter without her deciding it. She felt the small ribs rise and settle against her forearm, the warm weight of the sleeping head at her collarbone, and she anchored herself to that, to the one solid thing in a room that had tilted sideways. She did not look at the wrist. She looked at the man's shoulder, at the black wool of it, at the koi at his collar, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had seen that mark once already today, and had told herself it meant nothing. "Let go," Ethan said. The word came out thin. You're breaking my—" "I know." 2 words. The first Jasmine had heard from him since the cafe, and they landed flat and quiet in the middle of the ballroom, and somehow, they were louder than Ethan's discourse had been over the microphone. The man bent his head slightly. He looked at Ethan the way a man reads a receipt he already knows the total of. Then he spoke again, and his voice did not rise, and it did not shake, and that was what made the whole front of the room lean in without meaning to. "You put your hand on my wife this afternoon." Something moved through the crowd. Not a gasp, a shift. 100 chairs creaking a quarter inch as bodies turned. Diane, 3 tables away, went rigid, with her clutch pressed flat to her stomach. At the front table, the blonde wife's smile finally came all the way off. Ethan's eyes cut sideways to Jasmine. Confusion cracked through the pain. What? She's not— You shook the stroller my daughter was sleeping in." The word daughter dropped into the room and did not come back up. Jasmine's breath caught somewhere under her ribs and stayed there. Wife, daughter, she heard them, and her mind reached back across the whole afternoon. The black coffee, the folded bills, the note turned face down, the exact number no one had been told, and the arithmetic she had refused to finish that morning finished itself. $412. The debt she had spoken to no one. He had known because he had already decided. Not luck, not a stranger's kindness, a choice made before she ever looked up from the register. Her eyes stung. She blinked hard and refused it. She would not cry in this room. Not now, not with all of them watching, not with Mia's face against her throat where the girl would feel it. She had held that line all afternoon, through worse than this. She held it now. But something under the line had come apart quietly, some brace she had carried so long she'd stopped feeling its weight, and behind her ribs it simply let go, and the letting go had no name she wanted to say out loud. He had watched her the whole time. That was the part that undid her. Not the money. Money she could have argued with, refused, mailed back in an envelope. But the watching. From the cafe doorway to the marble column to this. A man had looked at her carrying everything alone and had decided, without asking, without being thanked, to stand where the other side of the weight should have been. She did not move. Mia's heartbeat ticked against her collarbone, fast and small, and she pressed her lips to the curls and held very still, because if she moved, she thought her legs might not agree to keep holding her up. Ethan was laughing now, or trying to, a wet, broken sound with no air behind it. This is, you don't know who I am. I know exactly who you are. The man turned Ethan's captured wrist a degree, just a degree, and Ethan's whole torso followed it down toward the floor, because there was no other way to survive the angle. You are a man who found out where her child goes to school. You said the name of it into a microphone. I didn't touch the kid. You will listen now. Still quiet, still level. The room strained toward it. Touch my wife again. Touch my daughter again. Say the name of her daughter's school in a room again. A pause, and in the pause the whole ballroom held its breath with him. And there will not be enough of you left to bury. No one laughed. No one had laughed for a full minute now, and the silence had a weight to it, and every person in that room felt the exact moment the afternoon stopped being about Jasmine at all. You don't get to do this, Ethan gasped. You can't just… There are witnesses. There are 200. Yes. The man's head turned a fraction toward the room, then back. 200 people watched you drag her by the arm. 200 people watched the stroller. Look at them. Ask them what they saw. Ethan did not look. He could not have turned his head far enough without moving the wrist, and he had learned in the last 30 seconds exactly what moving the wrist cost. His throat worked. Whatever calculation ran behind his gray face, the lawyers, the story, the version he always got out first, Jasmine watched it run and watched it fail, because for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell was in a room where being the loudest voice bought him nothing at all. He let go. He simply opened his hand, and Ethan staggered back 2 steps and caught the edge of a table with his good arm, sending a water glass over, and the spill spread across white linen, and no one moved to stop it. Ethan cradled the wrist against his chest. It hung at a wrong angle. His face had gone gray and shining, and the arrogance that had lived on it for 30 years was gone, and what was underneath was just a man who had realized, 3 seconds too late, exactly how small he had always been. The man in black did not look at him again. He turned to Jasmine, and this was the thing she would carry, more than the sound of the wrist, more than the word wife. The way the whole force of him simply switched off when he faced her. The stillness in him softened at the edges. His eyes went to Mia first, always to Mia first, then to Jasmine's face. Are you hurt? He said, not loud, for her. She shook her head. She found she could not make the word. He nodded once, as if that settled a great deal, and bent and picked the fallen coat off the floor, where it had lain since Ethan grabbed her, and folded it once over his forearm. He set his hand near the stroller handle, the stroller he had folded minutes ago, the catch that jammed every morning of her life opened clean in his grip, and he waited. He did not take her arm. He did not steer her. He stood at her side, 1 step off, and left the next move to her. At the front of the room, a chair scraped. Priya was on her feet. She had been half risen for minutes, her husband's hand on her sleeve, and now she pulled free of it and stood the whole way up, and she was not looking at Ethan either. She was looking at Jasmine, and her chin was doing something complicated, and she brought her hands together in front of her. Not applause, not yet, just the need to do something with them. Then Marcus stood. Then a woman 2 tables over whose name Jasmine had never learned. Then the whole VIP table near the podium came up in a wave, chairs pushing back all along the front, and it moved through the room like wind crossing a field, this standing, until half the ballroom was on its feet and none of them were smiling the way they'd smiled 20 minutes ago. Diane did not stand. Diane sat with her clutch against her stomach and her mouth slightly open and her rehearsed smile nowhere on her face, and she watched the room rise around her and understood, finally, which side of the afternoon she had chosen. She tried, once, to fix it. Jasmine, I didn't know he'd… The sentence reached out across 3 tables and found nothing to hold and fell short, and a few heads turned toward her, and the turning was worse than silence, and Diane closed her mouth around the rest of it and did not open it again. The clipboard that had put a barista at the back of the room sat forgotten on the linen in front of her, and no one in that ballroom would ever look at it, or at her, the same way. Jasmine looked at all of it, the standing people, the gray man clutching his ruined wrist, the blonde wife frozen at the front table with her hand halfway to her own mouth, the organizer sitting alone in a sea of people getting to their feet, and she felt none of the things she had spent 5 years bracing to feel. No triumph, no heat, just a strange, wide quiet, like the moment after a bell stops ringing. She looked at the man beside her. He met her eyes and waited. Everything in him waited. He had done what he came to do, and now he stood one careful step away and asked for nothing, and Jasmine understood that if she turned and walked to the service doors alone, he would let her, and would probably watch from a distance the way he'd watched all day, and would probably keep paying invoices she never saw, and would never once press her for the thing that men like Ethan took by force. That was the difference. That was the whole difference, standing there in a black suit with her daughter's blanket folded over his arm. Jasmine shifted Mia higher on her shoulder. The girl stirred, one small hand fisting in the collar of her mother's coat, and mumbled something into her neck and went heavy again, asleep, safe, unaware that the whole shape of her life had just changed in a hotel ballroom while she dreamed. "She likes to be walked," Jasmine said. Her voice came out lower than she expected, and steadier. "When she wakes up like that, if you walk, she goes back down." The man looked at her. Something passed behind his eyes. Quick, there and gone. Not a smile. He did not seem to be a man who smiled, but the near side of one. "Then we walk," he said. He turned toward the center of the room. Not the service doors at the back. The center aisle, the long one, the one that ran straight past the podium, and Ethan and Diane's table, and the standing crowd, and out through the tall front doors where the valet stand waited, and the afternoon light came in gold across the marble. He did not walk ahead of her. He set the pace to hers. Jasmine took the first step. The whole room watched her take it. She felt every eye, and for the first time all day, the weight of them did not bend her. She walked with her daughter asleep on her shoulder and her spine straight and her chin exactly level, and the man kept even with her, one step off her right side, the folded stroller in one hand and the coat over his arm, matching her stride so that they moved down the center of that ballroom together, at the speed of a sleeping child. The walk was long. She had sat at the back of this room an hour ago because a woman with a clipboard had decided that was where she belonged, and now the whole length of it opened in front of her like a corridor cleared by hand. People stepped back from the aisle without being asked. A man moved his chair in. A woman she half recognized reached out as if to touch her sleeve and then drew the hand back, not from coldness, from something closer to reverence, and let her pass. They passed the front table. The blonde wife did not look up. She sat with both hands in her lap and her eyes fixed on the ring on her own finger, and whatever she was thinking, it was not a thing she would say tonight, or perhaps ever, in the house on the ridge with the man who had come home with his wrist in a cast and a new silence between them. They passed Diane. Jasmine did not turn her head. She had rehearsed, in 5 years of imagined versions of this day, 100 things she might say to Diane Whitmore, and now that the moment stood open in front of her, she found she wanted none of them. Diane was not worth the turn of a neck. Silence said it better than any sentence she could have built. She walked past the organizer without a flicker, and the not looking landed harder than a slap, and Jasmine felt Diane feel it. They passed Ethan. He had slid down into a chair someone had pushed at him, wrist cradled, and a small, useless knot of people had gathered who did not quite dare to touch him. As Jasmine came level with him, he lifted his head. He opened his mouth. 5 years of him lived in the breath he took to speak. The version of the story he'd told first and told fastest. The one where she was the one who left. The one where he was the reasonable one. The one that had followed her out of every room since. Jasmine looked at him. She did not stop walking. She did not slow. She simply turned her eyes to him for the length of one step and let him see that there was nothing there. No anger left for him to feed on. No wound for him to press. No fear. Just a woman looking at a thing she had finished being afraid of a long time ago and had only now noticed. Jazz. It came out of him small, reflexive, the old habit of a man who had always been able to call her back with a single syllable. Jasmine, wait. She did not wait. That was the answer. For 5 years he had told a room she was the one who ran. And now the room was watching her walk, slow and level, a child on her shoulder, and there was no version of that he could tell over. His voice found the edge of her back and slid off it. Whatever he had been about to say, he did not say the rest. His mouth closed. His head went down, and she was past him. The man in black had watched that too, and had not slowed either, and Jasmine understood that he had left Ethan for her to walk past on her own terms, that he could have said one more word and finished him, and had chosen instead to let her have that step, that look, that silence. It was, she thought, the most careful thing anyone had done for her in years. The front doors were open ahead, the light came through them. Mia woke as they reached the threshold. She lifted her head off her mother's shoulder, blinking, curls flattened on one side, star clip winking, and looked around at the tall, bright room and the standing people with the frank, unbothered curiosity of the very young. Her eyes found the man beside them. She studied him, he studied her back, and slowed a half-step so she could look her fill. "Hi," Mia said. The man inclined his head, grave, formal, as if she were the most important person he had addressed all day, and perhaps to him she was. "Hello," he said. Mia considered this, then she laid her head back down on her mother's shoulder, satisfied, and put her thumb near her mouth, and said, "To no one, to the room, to the afternoon, I'm hungry." And that ordinary, 4-year-old, unimpressed complaint, floating out over a ballroom of 200 stunned adults, was the thing that finally broke Jasmine. Not the wrist, not the word wife. This, her daughter, hungry, safe, bored, asking for lunch in a hotel where a man had just promised to unmake anyone who touched her. Jasmine laughed, once, low, helpless, the sound catching wet in her throat, and she pressed her lips to her daughter's hair to hold it in, and did not entirely manage. "We'll get you something," she said. "We're going now." They crossed the threshold together. The light outside was the ordinary gold of a Wednesday afternoon. The valet stand stood empty of the sneer it had held that morning. The young man there straightened fast when he saw who came through the doors, and reached for something before anyone asked. The marble gave way to open air. Behind them the ballroom stayed on its feet, and the noise that had been held down for 3 long minutes finally came loose. Not laughter this time, a rising murmur, the sound of 200 people turning to each other to begin telling the story they had just watched. The true one. The one that would follow Ethan Caldwell down every hallway for the rest of his small life. Jasmine did not look back at it. She stood on the top step with her daughter on her shoulder and the light on her face, and beside her, a man she still did not have a name for held a folded stroller and her fallen coat, and waited, again, for her to choose the next step. "I don't know your name," she said. He looked at her, the near smile again, at the edge of him. "Seo Taehyun." She turned the sound of it over. It fit him, the way the quiet fit him. "You paid the school," she said. "Not a question. Not this time. This morning, before I ever looked up." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet a moment. The stroller wheel ticked as he set it down and pressed it open with one foot, smooth, no jam. He held the handle steady for her. "Because I watched you carry too much for too long," he said, with no one steadying the other side. She waited for more. There was no more. She had spent the whole day braced for the catch in it, the price, the thing men wanted back when they gave you something you couldn't afford. And it did not come, and its not coming was louder than any promise. "People don't do that," she said. "Not for a stranger, not for the exact amount, not without wanting. I am not most people." He said it without weight, the way another man might state his height. "And you were never a stranger to me after the first morning. You did not see me count the tip jar. $90. You put the envelope under the drawer, and you kept the smile on for the next customer." He paused. A person should not have to be that strong before 6 in the morning. That was all. He did not explain it further. He did not tell her what he was, or what he owned, or how long he had watched, or what the koi on his neck meant to the men who knew to be afraid of it. He would tell her those things, or she would learn them, in the days that came, the days that started now, on this step, in this light. But he said none of it here, and Jasmine understood that the not saying was itself the answer, the whole grammar of the man. He steadied the other side and let you keep your own weight and asked for nothing back. She lowered Mia gently into the stroller. The girl went in without protest, still half drowsy, and Jasmine reached for the strap and found his hand already there, buckling it, careful, the tattooed fingers that had folded a wrist a minute ago, now working a child's harness clasp without a wasted motion. The buckle clicked. Jasmine straightened. She took the handle. He let her. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She started down the steps into the gold light with her daughter in front of her, and the man an even step at her side, and she did not walk fast and she did not walk afraid, and she did not once, all the way to the street, look back at the room that had spent 5 years believing it knew her story. She had a different one now. It had been sitting in a cafe at 6 in the morning, ordering black coffee, watching the stroller before it ever watched her. At the bottom of the steps, she stopped and turned to him one last time. Mia had already tipped back toward sleep, thumb near her mouth, the star clip catching the light. Jasmine looked at the man who had a name now, and a wife he had claimed out loud, and a fish on his neck that half a city was afraid of, and she found she was not afraid of any of it. "She's going to want to know who you are," Jasmine said, tipping her head toward the stroller. "When she's older, she's going to ask." Taehyun looked down at the sleeping child. Something in his face eased that had not eased all day. "Then I will still be here to tell her," he said. It was not a promise dressed up in soft words. It was a fact laid flat, the way he laid everything flat, and Jasmine believed it the way she had believed the $412. Completely, and without knowing yet how she knew. The doors closed behind them, and the quiet one walked her home. The black car waited at the bottom of the stairs, engine already running, a driver at the wheel who had not been told to come and had come anyway. Taehyun opened the rear door before Jasmine reached for it. She stopped on the last step, one hand on the stroller handle, and looked at the seat, at the leather, at the small folded blanket someone had left across it, as if a child had been expected all along. "I have my car," she said. "I know." He did not argue past that. He held the door and let the sentence sit in the warm afternoon air until she understood it was not a command. Her car was 3 blocks east, in a lot that charged by the hour, with a booster seat strapped in the back that had a juice stain shaped like a country nobody had named. Everything she owned had a history like that. She looked at the clean leather again and felt, for one thin second, ashamed of the juice stain, and then angry at herself for feeling it. "Little Sprouts closes at 6, she said. "I pick her up Fridays at 5. Today is Wednesday. I know what day it is." Mia stirred against her collarbone, one small hand opening and closing on the fabric of the dusty blue dress. The girl was not fully asleep and not fully awake, riding that soft ledge children ride when they trust the arms holding them. Jasmine adjusted her weight, felt the ache starting in her shoulder, the one that always started around this hour, whether she was carrying a child or a tray. "I can drive us," she said again, quieter. Taehyun studied her the way he studied everything, without hurry, as if the answer were already written somewhere, and he was only waiting for her to read it out loud. Then he stepped back from the door. He did not close it. He left the choice open on its hinge. "Then I will follow," he said, "to the lot." It was not what she expected. She had expected pressure. Everyone in her life who had ever offered her something had followed the offer with a bill. Ethan had offered her a future once and mailed her the invoice 11 weeks in. Diane had offered her a seat at the reunion and set the price at humiliation. This man was standing on a 5-star staircase with a broken-wristed man 12 feet behind him inside, and he was offering to walk to a parking lot. "Why?" she said. It came out flat, not a question, the way her mother used to say it when a thing was too good and therefore suspect. "Because you should not carry her 3 blocks, Taehyun said, "and you will not let me carry her. So I will walk beside you and carry nothing, and you will let me do that much." She almost laughed. It caught in her chest and turned into something else on the way up, something that stung behind her eyes, and she blinked it down the way she had blinked everything down for 4 years. "Fine," she said. "You can carry nothing." They walked. The doorman held the glass for them and looked at Taehyun, and then looked very hard at the middle distance, the way people looked when they had decided the safest place for their eyes was anywhere else. Out on the sidewalk, the city was loud and ordinary. A bus sighed at the corner. A man sold pretzels from a cart and shouted a price at nobody. Jasmine walked with her daughter against her shoulder and a mafia boss on her left carrying, as promised, nothing at all, his hands loose at his sides, the tattoo on his neck vanishing under his collar with every step. Mia woke fully at the second crosswalk. She lifted her head off her mother's shoulder, blinked at the tall buildings, and did the thing 4-year-olds do, which is to arrive at full consciousness with a complete opinion already formed. "I want the yellow one," Mia announced, pointing at a taxi. "That's a taxi, baby." "I want it." "We don't want it. We have our own car." Mia considered this, then turned her whole small body in her mother's arms to look at the man walking beside them. She looked at him for a long time, the frank, uncomplicated stare of a child who had not yet learned that staring was rude. Taehyun looked back at her. He did not smile. He did not do the thing adults did, the wide, false brightening, the voice pitched up an octave. He just met her eyes as if she were a person whose opinion he intended to take seriously. "You're the man from the party," Mia said. "Yes." "You broke that man's arm." Jasmine's step faltered. She had thought Mia asleep. She had built the whole afternoon on the belief that Mia had slept through the worst of it, and now the belief cracked down the middle, and she felt the floor of her stomach drop. Taehyun did not lie. That was the first thing she noticed. A different man would have said, "No, sweetheart, nobody broke anything," would have painted over it fast and smooth. He walked 3 more steps, and then he said, "He grabbed your mother. I made him stop." "Oh," Mia said. That was all. "Oh," the single syllable of a child filing a fact away in whatever vast, simple library children kept. She turned back around, satisfied, and pointed at a pigeon. "He stopped," she confirmed, to the pigeon. Jasmine walked the rest of the block with her jaw tight and her eyes forward, and the thing behind her eyes rising again, harder this time, because it was one thing to be protected, and another thing entirely to have your daughter narrate the protection back to you, in the flat accounting voice of the very young. She had spent 4 years keeping ugliness away from that small face. She had scheduled her whole life around the gap between what Mia saw and what Jasmine survived. And in one afternoon, the gap had closed, and there was nothing she could do to open it again, and the man responsible was walking beside her carrying nothing and telling her daughter the truth. "You shouldn't have told her that," she said, low, when Mia's attention was on the pigeon. "You would rather I taught her that men lie about it. I would rather she didn't know men do it at all." Taehyun was quiet for half a block. Then he said, "She knows. She was in the stroller when it shook. Children keep what they feel, even when they lose the words for it. If no one gives her the true words, she will grow up believing the feeling was hers to be ashamed of." Jasmine stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the sidewalk with her daughter on her shoulder and the traffic going by, and she looked at this man she had met that morning across a pastry case, and she understood, with the particular clarity that arrives too late to prepare for, that he had said the truest thing anyone had said to her in years, and that it had cost her the last dry corner of her composure to hear it. The tears came then, not a storm, 2 of them, one from each eye, tracking down through the light morning makeup, and she did not wipe them, because both her arms were full of child. "Don't," she said, when he moved as if to speak. "Don't say anything kind. I can't hold her and hear something kind at the same time. Something in me will let go." So he said nothing kind. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded handkerchief, white, pressed, and he held it up in front of her at the level of her cheek, and he waited, and when she gave the smallest nod he touched it to her face, once under each eye, careful as a man diffusing something, and then he folded the cloth back into his pocket and started walking again, as if it had not happened. She followed. Her legs did the following without asking her. The parking lot attendant knew her by sight because she came Wednesdays for the reunion she now wished she had skipped, and every other Wednesday for nothing, because Wednesdays were the day the good bakery downtown sold day-old bread at half price and she drove there to buy Mia's week of toast. The attendant looked up from his booth, took in the dusty blue dress, and the crying woman, and the child, and the man in the black suit, and did a rapid recalculation of a life he thought he'd understood. "Rough party?" he tried. "Something like that," Jasmine said. Her car sat in the far corner where the hourly rate was lowest, a 9-year-old sedan with a dented rear panel from a shopping cart and a parking pass expired since March that she kept in the window because renewing it cost money and the lot never checked. She was aware of the car the way you become aware of your clothes when someone rich looks at them. She had never once been ashamed of that car. It ran. It got Mia to school and Jasmine to the counter, and both of them home. It had never left her stranded, which was more than she could say for any man who had ever sat in its passenger seat. But she was ashamed now, walking toward it with him beside her, and the shame made her furious, and the fury was almost a relief, because it was easier to carry than the crying. "This is us," she said, and there was a dare buried in it. A C. This is what you followed. This is the whole size of my life. In a corner. Expired. Dented. Taehyun looked at the car. He looked at it the same way he looked at the taxi and the pigeon and her daughter's face, without ranking it against anything. "The catch on the stroller sticks," he said. "Does the seatbelt in the back stick as well?" "The buckle. On cold mornings." "Show me." She opened the rear door. The booster seat sat there, with its juice-stained continent, its cracker crumbs in the crevices, the small archaeology of a child's every day. She reached to buckle Mia in, and Mia, who had views, decided this was the moment to arch her back and go rigid, and announce that she was hungry, a state of emergency she had been declaring at intervals since the ballroom. "I'm hungry." "I know, baby." "We're going home. There's toast." "I don't want toast. I want the party food." "You didn't eat any party food." "I saw it." "Seeing it isn't eating it, Mia. It should be." And there, absurdly, in the far corner of a parking lot, with her makeup ruined and a broken man behind her in a ballroom, and a stranger with a koi on his neck watching her fight a 4-year-old into a booster seat, Jasmine laughed, a real one this time. It broke out of her sideways and surprised them both. "It should be," she agreed, and kissed her daughter's forehead, and got the sticky buckle to click on the second try, the way the cafe alarm clicked on the second try, the way everything in her life clicked on the second try, a whole existence run on second tries, and she had made it work anyway. She straightened out of the car and turned, and Taehyun was holding something. He had gone to the black sedan, which had pulled up to idle at the mouth of the lot, and he had come back, and in his scarred hands was a paper bag, grease already blooming at one corner, and the smell coming off it was butter and sugar and something warm. "From the hotel kitchen," he said. "I asked them to make a plate before we left. I did not know if she ate before. He set it on the roof of her dented car, this bag of 5-star food carried out to a 9-year-old sedan, and he did it without ceremony. And Jasmine looked at the grease stain spreading on the paper and thought about the envelope on the register that morning, the $412 folded face down, the way a man could know the exact shape of what you needed and hand it to you, turned away so you couldn't see him do it. "You planned this," she said. "I planned the money," he said. "The food I thought of in the elevator, and the walk, and the car following, and the handkerchief. The handkerchief I have always carried," he said. "My grandmother. She said a man who cannot dry a face has no business near one." It was the most he had said about himself all day. She held it carefully, this small square of a life she knew nothing about, a grandmother, a rule about faces, and she understood he had handed it to her the way he handed everything, turned slightly away, so she could take it without owing him the sight of it. Mia had discovered the bag through the open door. "Is that mine?" "It's yours," Taehyun said. "All of it?" "All of it." Mia looked at her mother for the ruling. Jasmine, who spent her days measuring out portions against a budget, who cut apples into halves that were really quarters to make them last, who knew to the dollar what a week of a child cost, opened her mouth to say we'll share it, and closed it again. "All of it," she said. "Just today." The girl received this the way she received the news about the man's arm, with a solemn nod, filing today under the small archive of days that were different. Jasmine handed her a pastry from the bag, and the child bit into it, and butter went everywhere, and for a moment there was nothing in the world but a 4-year-old eating something warm in the back of a car, and it was, Jasmine thought, watching her, the best thing she had seen in a year, and it had taken a broken wrist and a ruined reunion and a stranger's grandmother to arrange it. She shut the rear door softly. Then she stood with her back against the car, the metal warm through the thin dress, and she let her head tip back for one breath, and she felt the whole day land on her at once. Not the fear, the after. The place you reach when the danger has passed and your body finally admits how much it spent staying upright through it. Her knees went loose. She pressed her palms flat against the car door behind her and breathed. "You should sit," Taehyun said. "I'm fine. You are not. You have been carrying her and the bag and the coat and your own weight since morning, and no one has steadied the other side." There it was again, the other side. He had used the phrase on the staircase, and he used it again now, and she realized it was not a line he had prepared. It was how he actually saw her. A person carrying something two people should carry, from one end, alone, in a dusty blue dress, for years, and getting it there anyway. "People have offered to steady it before," she said. "The offer usually costs more than the carrying. I know what my offer costs." "Do you?" "It costs you the certainty that you did it alone." He said it without heat, laying it flat, the way he laid everything. "That is the whole price. Some people would rather pay anything else." She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, through the glass, Mia was singing to the pastry, a tuneless, improvised song about butter, the private opera of a happy child. In front of her stood a man who had told her daughter the truth, and dried her face, and known to the dollar what she owed, and turned the bill face down. And the terrible thing, the thing she would not say out loud in a parking lot with grease cooling on paper, was that he had named the price exactly, and that she was afraid of it, because she had built her whole self out of the certainty he was offering to take. "I don't know how to want help," she said. It was the most honest sentence she had spoken all day, more honest than anything she'd said to Ethan, to Diane, to the room. "I forgot how. Somewhere in the last 5 years I put it down, and I can't find where." "Then we look for it slowly," Taehyun said. "Not today. Today she eats. You breathe. I carry nothing, as agreed." The absurd tenderness of it, as agreed, undid something. She pressed her lips together and got herself back and pushed off the car and stood on her own, because she could, because standing on her own was the one thing she had never once failed at, and she wanted him to see her do it, and she suspected he already knew that too. "I'm going to drive her home," she said. "There's toast she won't eat and a bath she'll fight and a bed she'll get out of 4 times. That's my afternoon. It's not fancy." "It is the whole of it," he said. "The fancy is the part that means nothing." He stepped back from the car door. He had spent the entire afternoon stepping back, she realized, opening things and stepping back, and it was the opposite of every man before him, all of whom had stepped forward, into her space, into her life, into the small budget of her strength, and taken. She got into the driver's seat. The door was heavy, and it stuck, and she pulled it shut with the practiced yank the door required. And she rolled the window down because the air conditioning had died in June, and she couldn't afford the recharge, and she was not ashamed of the window anymore, or the door, or the dent. Somewhere between the ballroom and the lot the shame had burned off, the way fog burns off, and left the plain morning under it. Taehyun stood at the window. He took something from his jacket, the inside pocket, the one near the heart, and he held it a moment before he offered it, and she saw it was a card. Plain, heavy stock, 1 line of numbers, no name, no title, no coy, nothing that said what he was, only a way to reach him, the way the envelope that morning had been only a way to pay. "You don't have to use it," he said. "It is not a leash. It is a number. If the buckle sticks on a cold morning and there is no one, you call it, and someone comes and fixes the buckle. That is all it does." She looked at the card. She did not take it right away. In the back seat, Mia had moved on to a second pastry and was narrating that too. The afternoon light came slantwise across the lot and caught the grease on the bag and the dent in the door and the plain card in his scarred hand, and Jasmine understood that this was the moment, the real one, the one the whole day had been walking toward, more than the broken wrist, more than the word wife said out loud in a room of 200. This, a card through a car window, take it or don't. She took it. She did not thank him, because thanking him would have made it a gift, and a gift had a price, and he had told her the only price, and it wasn't gratitude. She put the card in the cup holder, next to the parking stub, next to a crayon worn to a nub, and she put her hands on the wheel. "I open the cafe at 5:40, she said, looking through the windshield, not at him. "Tomorrow, same as every day. I know. If a man comes in and orders coffee, black, small, and pays too much, I'm going to charge him the right price." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. On his face, it was practically a speech. "He knows that too," Taehyun said. She started the car. The engine caught on the second try. She pulled out of the corner spot with her daughter singing about butter in the back and a plain card in the cup holder, and a man in a black suit standing in the rearview mirror, growing smaller, carrying, as promised, all the way to the last, nothing at all. At the mouth of the lot, she stopped for traffic. In the mirror, he had not moved. He stood exactly where she'd left him, watching the car the way he had watched the corner of the ballroom, the way she now understood he had probably been watching for longer than one morning, one afternoon, one reunion, watching her carry too much for too long with no one steadying the other side. Mia leaned forward against her booster straps. "Mama." "Yes, baby." "Is he coming to our house?" Jasmine's hands tightened on the wheel. The traffic broke. She had a gap. She could pull into it and drive home to the toast and the bath and the 4 escapes from bed, into the life that was hers alone, that she had built alone, that she had defended alone through a microphone and a grabbed arm and a room full of laughter. She could drive into it and close the door and keep the certainty he'd named the price of, the certainty that she did it by herself, and hold it against her chest in the dark, the way she'd held it for 4 years. She looked in the mirror one more time. The gap in traffic closed. She'd missed it. Another car filled it, and she had to wait. And while she waited, she watched the man in the mirror not move, and she felt the question sitting in the back seat, patient, 4 years old, unafraid, asking the thing she had not let herself ask. "I don't know," she said finally, and it was the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, the truth did not feel like a wall she was standing behind. It felt like a door she had not yet decided whether to open. "I like him," Mia said, and went back to her pastry. The traffic opened again. This time, Jasmine took the gap. She turned the car toward home, toward the toast and the bath and the small, loud, ordinary evening, and she drove, and she did not look in the mirror again, because she did not need to. She knew he was still standing there. She knew, the way she had known about the $412, completely, and without yet understanding how she knew, that the number in the cup holder would still work tomorrow, and the morning after, and the cold one after that, when the buckle stuck and there was no one. She just wasn't ready, yet, to find out what came after the card. But she had taken the card, and somewhere behind her, growing small in a parking lot, the quiet one watched her go, and let her. The card sat in the cup holder for 2 days before Jasmine touched it again. She noticed it every time she reached for her keys. Heavy paper, a single row of numbers, no name. It rode next to the parking stub and the worn nub of chalk, and she left it there, the way you leave a door unlocked when you haven't decided whether you want anyone to walk through it. Wednesday night she made toast. Mia stood on the step stool and buttered her own, mostly the counter. They ran the bath, they fought about the bath, they won and lost the bath in the usual order. Jasmine pulled the curly hair into 2 puffs, damp at the roots, and Mia asked the question again with her toothbrush in her fist. "Is the quiet man coming to our house?" Jasmine crouched to her level. "I don't know yet, baby." "Okay." Mia spit into the sink. "I hope." That was all of it. No campaign, no tears. A 4-year-old filing a wish and moving on to the next thing, which was whether the toothpaste was the sparkle kind. Jasmine turned off the tap and held the answer in her chest a while, because for the first time it didn't feel like a wall she was holding up. It felt like weather she was waiting on. Thursday she opened at 5:40. She keyed the alarm on the second try, the way she always did, and the sound of it clearing was the sound of the day starting. She ground the beans. She dropped the chairs. She loaded the case with the day-old pastries she'd bought half price, and she thought, once, of a paper bag on the roof of her dented car and a little girl covered in butter, and she let the thought pass without chasing it. The card stayed in the car. She had decided something without saying it to herself. She would not call, because a stranger had told her she could. She would call if she needed to, and only then, and she would know the difference. That was the whole of the price he'd named, the certainty that she'd carried her own weight. She meant to keep it honest. Then Friday came, and Friday was the deadline. Little Sprouts closed at 6. Pickup was 5. She had the $412 in an envelope in the diaper bag, counted twice, and she carried it into the office and slid it across to the woman at the desk who'd written the note by hand. The woman ran it, stamped it, and said the matriculation was current through the term. Jasmine stood there a second longer than the transaction required. "Thank you," she said, and meant it at a stranger. Mia came out with a paper turkey and glue on her sleeve. On the drive home, she narrated the turkey. Jasmine listened to all of it. The cold came in overnight, early for the season, a front that dropped the temperature 15 degrees while they slept. Jasmine felt it in the floorboards when her feet hit them at 5:15. She dressed Mia in the yellow dress and the white cardigan and the tights, and she carried her half asleep down to the car in the dark, because there was no one else to leave her with and the shop didn't open itself. The engine caught on the second try. That part held. The buckle did not. She got Mia into the booster and reached for the harness, and the release wouldn't seat. The metal had gone stiff with the cold the way it always did on the worst mornings, and she pressed it, and it clicked and slid and would not hold the tongue. Mia squirmed. "Mama, it's cold." Jasmine pressed harder. Her thumb went white. The buckle mocked her with a half catch, a sound like it was working, and then nothing. She checked the clock. 5:31. She could not drive with the child unbuckled, and she could not be late to the only shift that kept the lights on, and there was no one, 3 states of distance in every direction, no one to steady the other side. Her eyes went to the cup holder, the heavy paper, the single row of numbers. She sat with her hand on it for a breath. Not a leash, he'd said, a number. If the buckle jams on a cold morning and there is no one, you call, and someone fixes the buckle. He had named the exact circumstance like a man who had already seen it happen from far away. She hated, for 1 second, how well he knew the shape of her life. Then she dialed. It rang once. Jasmine, not a question. His voice was the same as it had been on the staircase, low and unhurried, like he'd been holding the phone before it rang. "The buckle," she said. Her throat was tight. "It's the cold." "It won't. I have to open in 20 minutes and I can't get her." "Where are you parked?" She told him. The hourly lot, the corner spot, the low-rate stall she took on Wednesdays, and now, apparently, on every morning the front came through. "Stay in the car," he said. "Keep her warm, don't fight it." The line went dead before she could decide whether to thank him. She turned the heat to the vent that still worked, and pulled Mia's cardigan closed, and told her a story about a turkey who lived in a car, which Mia corrected in several places. 4 minutes passed. Jasmine watched the mouth of the lot in the mirror. The black car came in without hurry, headlights sweeping the concrete, and stopped 2 spaces off. He got out of the back before the driver could come around. No coat over the black suit, sleeves already turned at the forearm in the cold, like the temperature was a rumor he hadn't heard. He crossed to her window and she rolled it down, and he looked first at Mia, then at her, then at the buckle in her lap. "Show me," he said. She moved her hand. He leaned in through the back door she pushed open, and his fingers found the release, the scarred knuckles working the stiff metal with a patience that had nothing to prove. He didn't force it. He warmed the housing with his thumb, seated the tongue, pressed once, and the buckle closed with a clean, final click. Mia looked up at him. "You fixed it." "It was cold," he said, like that explained the buckle, and the morning, and the whole of why he was standing in a parking lot at 5:35. "I know you," Mia announced. "You broke that man's arm." "Mia." Jasmine's voice cracked on it. Taehyun didn't flinch. He looked at the child the way you look at someone whose facts you respect. "I did." "Okay." Mia settled back into the booster, satisfied, and asked whether they were going to the coffee place, and could she have the kind with the star on it. He straightened out of the car. Jasmine got out too, into the cold, and stood facing him over the open door because she couldn't say what she needed to say sitting down. "I wasn't going to call," she said. "I know. I want you to understand that I sat there deciding if I'd rather be late than owe you." "You weren't late." He glanced at the sky, gray going to pale at the edges. "And you don't owe me. A buckle is a buckle." "It's not just the buckle." Her breath showed. "You knew it would jam. You knew the exact morning. You put that on the card like a man reading a weather report on my life, and I don't." She stopped, pressed her lips, started again, quieter. "I don't know how to be watched that closely and not feel like I'm being managed." He took that. He didn't rush to soften it. The driver stayed by the black car, eyes forward, a man trained to see nothing. "You are not being managed," Taehyun said. "A person who wants to manage you would have kept you needing him. I fixed the buckle. Now you know how it seats when it's cold." He tipped his head a fraction toward the car. Thumb on the housing first. Warm it. It's not broken, it just forgets. She laughed once. Wet. Surprised out of her. You're teaching me my own car. I'm giving it back to you. He said it plainly. That's the difference you keep looking for. The cold sat between them, and she felt something in her chest give a quarter turn, the way the stroller catch had given under his hand in the ballroom. The thing that always jammed finally letting go. Mia asked if you're coming to our house, she said. He was still for a moment. Whatever moved behind his eyes, he let it reach his face this time, just barely, a loosening at the jaw. And what did you say? I said I didn't know yet. That's an honest answer. It was the first honest one I've given in 5 years that wasn't also a door I was slamming. She looked at him. I'm tired of slamming doors. I'm just not fast at opening them. I'm not in a hurry, he said. And then, because she was still holding the edge of the door like it might sail off, he added the thing she hadn't known she was waiting to hear. You don't have to decide this morning. You have to open the shop this morning. Go open the shop. She got back in the car. He shut the rear door for Mia, checked the buckle once with 2 fingers, and stepped back. She rolled the window up halfway, then down again. Thank you, she said. First time. It cost her, and she paid it. He inclined his head, the smallest bow. Drive safe. The engine held on the first try, which it never did, and she chose not to read anything into that, and she read something into it anyway. She opened at 5:42, 2 minutes late, and no one knew but her. The morning ran in its waves. She worked the counter alone, the way she did every day, and it was hers, and the fact that a man in a black car would come if a buckle froze did not make it less hers. That was the part she'd gotten wrong for a long time. She'd thought accepting the other side meant losing her own. She poured coffee for the regulars and made change and wiped the steam wand, and the shop was still the thing she opened alone in the dark. And now there was a number in the cup holder, and both were true. At 10 past 10 the bell over the door went, and she looked up already knowing. He stood where he'd stood the first morning, taking the room in before he took a step, and then he came to the counter and the koi showed at his collar when he leaned to reach his pocket. Coffee, he said. Black, small. $2.50, she said. He set down a bill. She looked at it. A single, folded once, and 3/4 counted out beside it. Exact and then some, the sum being change she'd hand right back. No hundreds, no envelope, no number turned face down that she'd never spoken aloud. She rang it. She made the coffee. She slid it across with the receipt and the 2/4 change, and he took the quarters without argument, and she understood that he'd heard her in the parking lot the first day, and again on the staircase, and he was telling her, with 75 cents, that he had. You could have overpaid, she said. You told me you'd charge the right price. He wrapped his hand around the cup. This is the right price. It is. Then we agree. Almost a smile. It never fully arrived, and it didn't need to. Mia's voice came from the corner behind the counter, where the stroller sat folded, and the child was not folded at all, but standing on the step stool she wasn't allowed on, holding a paper turkey. I made a turkey, she informed him. I see it, Taehyun said. It lives in the car. She held it higher. You want it? Jasmine started to intervene, the reflex of a mother who taught her child not to give away the only turkey she had, and then she stopped herself, because the child was offering the thing that mattered most to her, to the man who'd fixed the buckle, and there are gifts you don't get in the way of. Taehyun came around the end of the counter, which no customer did, and crouched to the level of a 4-year-old on a step stool, the black suit folding down without concern for the floor. He took the paper turkey in 2 scarred fingers, with the same care he'd used on the money, and the buckle, and the coat he'd lifted off a ballroom floor. Thank you, he said, grave, like she'd handed him something with weight. I'll keep it in my car. You have a car? I have a car. Is it black? It's black. Mia considered this and found it acceptable. Mama said maybe you come to our house. Jasmine's face went warm. Mama said she didn't know yet. Taehyun stood, the turkey held flat against his palm so the glue wouldn't smear. He looked at Jasmine over the child's head, and the question was there, unpushed, waiting on her the way he'd waited on her in the ballroom and on the staircase and by the frozen car, never once stepping in front of her, always beside. She wiped her hands on the apron. She looked at the folded stroller, the number in the cup holder of a car she now knew how to buckle in the cold, The little girl who'd given away her turkey. The man who'd chosen her family before she'd lifted her eyes from the register. She thought about the years of holding both sides alone. She thought about how tired she was of the word no when it wasn't protecting anything anymore, only habit. Sunday, she said. We do toast on Sundays, it's not fancy. Something moved through him and settled. I don't need fancy. There's glue on most surfaces. I saw the counter. And she'll ask you 100 questions. I'll answer them. He said it like a vow, the same weight he'd used on the staircase when she'd told him Mia would ask one day who he was. Then I will still be here to tell her. He hadn't forgotten it. Neither had she. Sunday, Jasmine said again, testing the shape of it, and this time it held like a buckle seated right. A clean click. Final. He set 2 more quarters on the counter. She looked at him. For the turkey's coffee? He said, deadpan, and Mia shrieked with laughter. And Jasmine laughed too, and the sound of it filled the shop she opened alone every morning in the dark. Before he went, he set the coffee down and reached into the inside pocket of the black jacket. Not for money this time. He drew out the white handkerchief, the pressed one, and unfolded it on the counter, and inside it was a small brass thing, machined, cold-looking. For the buckle, he said, when the housing forgets, you seat this over it, 1 turn and the cold doesn't reach the tongue. He set it beside the register. My grandmother kept one in every car she ever owned. She said a mother should never be stopped by metal. Jasmine picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, and it meant more than the 412 had. Because the 412 had solved a problem for her, and this was teaching her to solve it herself. Your grandmother, she said. The handkerchief was hers too. She raised me. He said it flat, the way he said everything that cost him. A man who can't dry a face has no business near one. A mother who's stopped by a buckle isn't stopped by the buckle. She's stopped by no one standing on the other side. He turned the cup in his hand. She stood on mine. I remember what it did. It was the most he'd said about himself since the staircase, and he said it, and then closed the subject the way he closed the stroller. 1 clean motion, no lingering. Sunday, he said, I'll bring one for the shop too, in case the case sticks. The case does stick. I know. I watched it stick for 3 years. She held the little brass tool in her palm and thought about how long he'd been watching, how far back the choosing went, and it didn't feel like surveillance anymore. It felt like someone had been keeping a list of the things that made her mornings harder, and one by one, without being asked, was taking them off the list. He carried the paper turkey out flat on his palm so it wouldn't bend. Through the window, she watched him cross to the black car, watched the driver open the door, watched him pause and turn the turkey once in the light like a man appraising something valuable before he set it, with care, on the dash where he'd see it. Then he looked back at the window. At her, he didn't wave. He inclined his head, the small bow, and got in, and the car pulled into traffic and was gone. Jasmine stood at the glass a moment. Mia was singing behind her, something about turkeys and coffee and Sundays, inventing the melody as she went. She thought about the first morning, the envelope on the register, the $90 in tips that wouldn't cover it, the buckle, the babysitter's text, the promise she'd made herself to sit at the back for 1 hour and leave with her chin up. She thought about how sure she'd been, that whole morning, that she was completely alone with all of it. She wiped down the counter. She dropped a fresh filter. The bell would ring again. It always did. The shop was hers. The mornings were hers. The small dented life was hers. And none of that had changed, and all of it had. Mama, Mia said, is Sunday soon? Soon enough, baby. Will he bring the turkey back? Jasmine smiled at the window, at the empty street where a black car had been. I think the turkey lives in his car now. Mia found this deeply satisfactory and returned to her song. The quiet one had watched her carry too much for too long, with no one steadying the other side. He'd paid a bill she never spoke. He'd broken an arm that grabbed her. He'd fixed a buckle in the cold and handed her back her own car and named a price no bigger than the certainty she'd done it herself. And she'd stopped, somewhere between a frozen parking lot and 75 cents on a coffee counter, mistaking his steadiness for a leash. Sunday, there would be toast. There would be glue on the counter, and 100 questions and a paper turkey riding on a dashboard across the city. There would be a knock on a door she'd finally decided to open, not because she couldn't hold both sides anymore, but because she no longer had to. She counted the tips at close of shift. 90-some dollars, same as most days. She put them in the jar. She didn't need them to cover anything today. The catch on the case that always stuck slid clean when she closed it. She noticed. She let herself notice. Sunday came slow, and then all at once, the way the deadline had. Jasmine was up before the light out of habit, but there was no shop to open and no alarm to key, and she stood in her own small kitchen not knowing what to do with a morning that wasn't a fight. She made the toast anyway. She set out the butter. She put 3 plates on the table and looked at the third one a long time. Mia woke and dressed herself, mostly, buttons in the wrong holes. Is it Sunday? It's Sunday. Is he coming? He's coming. The child stationed herself at the front window with the paper turkey's understudy, a second turkey, drawn in case the first one wasn't returned. She narrated the street, a bus, a man with a dog, a woman with bags, then a black car, easing to the curb like it had all the time in the world, and Mia's whole body went rigid with the importance of it. He's here, he's here, he's here. The knock came, too, even, unhurried. Jasmine wiped her hands on the dish towel and crossed the room and stood at the door 1 second longer than the moment needed, her hand on the latch, feeling the shape of the choice she'd finally decided to make. Then she opened it. He stood on the step in the black suit with no coat against the cold, and in one scarred hand he held the paper turkey, flat, carried across the whole city without a bend in it, and in the other, a small brass tool, wrapped in the white handkerchief. For the case, he said, and held it out. It sticks. I know, Jasmine said. You watched it stick for 3 years. Almost a smile. It didn't fully arrive. It didn't need to. Mia collided with his legs and demanded the turkey and got it. Taehyun crouched to her level in the doorway, unhurried, and handed it over with both hands like it was worth the trip, and Mia inspected it for damage and found none and pronounced him trustworthy. There's glue on the counter, Jasmine warned. You said. And she has 100 questions. Mia, on cue, delivered the first one. Do you have a grandma? Taehyun stood. He looked at Jasmine over the child's head, and then down at the child who'd asked the question she'd been told he would answer, and he answered it. I did, he said. She raised me. She's the one who taught me about buckles. Is she in your car too? No. A pause. But her handkerchief is. And now you have her tool. Mia accepted this cosmology entirely and moved to question 2, which was whether he liked toast, and question 3, which was whether the butter was the sparkle kind, and Jasmine stepped back from the door and let him in, into the small dented life, the yellow kitchen, the third plate, the morning that for once was not a fight. He wiped his shoes. He hung nothing because he'd brought nothing but a turkey and a tool. He sat where she pointed, at the third chair, and it held his weight the way the buckle had finally held. A clean seat, final. Jasmine put the toast down in front of the man who had chosen her family before she'd lifted her eyes from the register, and she sat, and Mia talked, and outside the cold held and the light came up gold at the edges of the buildings. She'd opened the door herself. That was the whole of it. He'd stood on the step and waited and let her be the one, the way he'd waited in the ballroom and on the staircase and by the frozen car, beside her, and never once in front. Eat, she said, before it's cold. I don't mind the cold, Taehyun said, and picked up the toast, and the quiet one ate breakfast at her table like a man who had finally, after watching for 3 years, been asked to steady the other side. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever opened the doors alone at dawn, giving everything for your child while the world treated you as invisible? Have you ever been mocked in a room full of people who forgot who they were talking to? And when someone finally stood between you and the ones trying to break you, did you let yourself believe you deserved to be protected? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, motherhood, and silent protection, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.